Welcome to today's webinar. This is Vanessa Keenan from the Online Synchro Coach, and I'm going to take you through the process that I use to analyze a routine. Make sure you've got pen, lots of paper, so you can take some notes while we go through all of the different areas. There are so many things that you can consider when you're analyzing your routines, but I like to pick 8 key areas. So that's patterns, synchronization, execution, difficulty, presentation, highlights, flexibility, and variety in the routine. As I go through this webinar, we'll touch on each of those areas and I will explain exactly what I'm looking for in those areas. Of course, I'm going to be starting with patterns. Patterns are one of my favorite parts of Synchro, and I feel like it's one of my strengths. And there's actually a really good reason for starting with patterns. I feel like patterns are the foundation, the framework for a really great routine. If your patterns are really solid, then it really helps the whole routine make sense. And it's a lot easier for the audience and the judges to appreciate what you're trying to do. First, there are 4 types of pattern changes that I want you to map out over your routine. So count out how many of these types of pattern changes you have. Underwater pattern changes. So this would be where a swimmer finishes a figure or a hybrid and then moves to a pattern underwater, and then the team surfaces in that pattern. There's in a figure or hybrid. So that's when swimmers are upside down doing some kind of leg movement. The pattern happens while we can see things going on, and then they end in that pattern while we can still see what's going on. Then you're checking for on the surface pattern changes. So that's if I'm in a 2-2-2 and my head's out of the water in egg beater and I kick, pull, kick into 2 lines and I can still see everyone's head or body out of the water. That would be another type of pattern change. And then the last pattern change is very uncommon. I consider this one as surfacing. Sometimes I've seen in routines where swimmers come out of the water and then as they're coming up, the pattern clicks. Okay, out of those 4 types of pattern changes, the underwater one is the easiest one, and in a hybrid is the hardest one. Okay, so making sure that you have a good variety of all of them. All right, not necessarily the as surfacing one, but that's just something to be aware of if there's some pattern change that is a little bit fuzzy. Balance of time. When I've analyzed the top routines in the world, I've noticed that the best routines, their laps tend to be about a minute to a minute 10, and then the last lap tends to be shorter because the time limit is shorter, right? Why is this important? Well, when I watch these routines, there's more balance over the whole routine, and for some reason when there's balance, it's easier to watch, it's easier to understand, and it just makes everything look so much easier. I have a great example from the coaching figures. There's this team I'm really competitive against. We have our 2 sets of swimmers. I videotaped everybody and I just couldn't figure out why we weren't getting credit for something. And so I checked out the figures. Our figures were the same length of time. But when I watched this other team, their figures seemed way longer. And I mean, I had it videotaped end time, so I knew their figures weren't longer. But what I noticed was my swimmers had faster and slower parts, so the balance of their timing over the whole figure wasn't balanced, it wasn't the same, so it gave the illusion of it being off. And I would argue that in routines, there's that similar feel that if things are not balanced, our brain just kind of starts to make up stuff and, making these stories. Balance of patterns. In your routine, how many pattern changes / patterns do you have per lap? In lap 1, do you have 10? And then in lap 2, you have 7. Lap 3, you have back to 10. And then maybe in lap 4, you do something like 15. Again, always looking for that balance. Unique patterns. Are you doing all the same types of patterns? Are you doing only rockets that's Christmas tree facing one way? Or are you being more creative and making sure that the patterns actually face different ways? Are you using more than just the standard 2-2-2-2, the rocket, 3-2-3, and 2 lines? Are you using more patterns than that? What does your pool pattern look like? Are you getting your routine to all sides of the pool? Are you getting to the ends? Are you getting to the corners? Just making sure that your pool pattern also is balanced and that the judges can see what you're doing. What's the distance that you're getting on your laps? Does it look like you're finishing your lengths? Are you finishing your widths? Maybe some widths you're not finishing, other ones you are, so being aware of that. There's also the synchronization of the moving and clicking into pattern. This is really important because the patterns, I think, almost come first. So if the pattern's not clear, then it really is going to throw other things off. So make sure that when a judge looks at your routine, they can see exactly what they're supposed to see, and then they can focus on everything else. And sometimes that means they can focus on how great your hybrids are. They can focus on how great your synchronization is. If your patterns are off, it's a distraction. What I really love about tracking patterns and all the things to do with patterns is it's not subjective. The number of pattern changes you have, how long your laps are, these are all very measurable criteria that you can write out, and it's hard to argue with that. So look at your patterns, right? And if you have 20 pattern changes in lap 1 and 5 in lap 4, it's pretty obvious what you need to do, right? And that's the great thing about this part of analyzing your routine, is that you get some clear data and you can go with that and fix your routines, right? Beyond that, if you're more advanced or your high level team, you might actually even go to other routines and see how many laps they're doing, how many pattern changes per lap are they doing, what kind of pattern changes are they doing, what types of patterns are they doing, right? So you can take this analyzation as far as you want to. For me, synchronization is the next priority. That might seem fairly obvious, I guess, but what you're really looking for is the unders. Does the team go under at the same time? Do they surface at the same time? These little details affect so much, right? The leg movement, so in their hybrids, is that synchronized? Our movements, obviously, are those synchronized? Propulsion, are they moving around the pool the same? When you analyze your routine, I wouldn't actually write down how many times they did something off, but maybe you could, you could, but maybe you do something more general, right? Like lap 1, you could give your unders a score out of 10. You could give your surfaces a score, your leg movements, the arm movements, propulsion, and then from there, you can set what the priorities are for each lap. Because every lap is probably going to be different, right? There's a lot of energy in the beginning of the routine. Maybe at a competition, there's nerves, so that might throw off synchronization. Whereas people are tired at the end of the routine, so you'll have to look at your routine, and then when you analyze the synchronization, you can take that information and see maybe the synchronization is becoming lower at the end because of endurance. So then you have some information there to allow you to change your training to help synchronization. If it's nerves at the beginning of the routine, what can you do to help your swimmers calm themselves before they swim so they're in their ideal swimming state to perform at the start of the routine? I think synchronization is pretty easy for us to catch, and we all know, but you need to actually track it so you have some numbers and idea where the priorities need to go. Execution, it can be the same way that you approach synchronization. So coming up with a marking scale per lap so you know where to find your priorities. The big things I look for: height, single leg, double leg, ballet legs, egg beater. Alignment, so are they actually square when they're doing a crane or a fishtail? How are their splits? What does the thrust look like? Patterns, talked a lot about that. The execution of the highlights. And then another execution point I like to watch for is extension. What is the extension of knees and ballet legs, the knees in walkouts, the knees in, doesn't really matter, in anything. How are the feet? Maybe your team has an issue with unders. Maybe they do a crane joint to vertical, beautiful lines, and then as they get close to the bottom, they're bailing on their extension as they disappear. These are little things that you can look at over the routine, and sometimes, depending on the level you swim at, for high level athletes, that little tiny little thing might be the difference, right? Because sometimes you can lose by 0.001. Okay, so for execution, again, use some kind of system, scoring system, so you know which laps that you want to focus on, or maybe it's certain figures, maybe it's different placement, and then that might even guide you to find different choreography ideas based on where these errors are happening. Because if there's execution problems, sometimes it's the athletes are doing something and they need to be coached to do it better. Other times, it's just for whatever reason, maybe they're too tired at that point of the routine, or maybe there's a pattern change that's strange going into it, and that's affecting the execution. So there actually needs to be a choreography change to help your swimmers be able to execute that. So when you analyze your routine, you'll be able to go through that and see what's causing the issues that you're having. Okay, it's not just about doing something better, it's why is this off? Difficulty. This one might be harder for some of you to judge on your own. I highly recommend going to the FINA manual and seeing how different movements rank according to their difficulty. Balance. So is the difficulty balanced over the routine, or is lap 1 really hard and then it gets easier towards the end? Or maybe lap 1 and 4 are really hard, but the middle is kind of whatever, right? Like, let's just make it till we get to the end to impress the judges again. Pattern changes. Are the pattern changes all really easy? Do you have any under or in hybrid pattern changes? Do you have pattern changes? Difficulty also increases the faster you do pattern changes, the closer swimmers are together. Do you have risk moves? So this could be highlights, it could be partner moves, it could be the hybrid you do, it could be a pattern change. Your highlights, are they easy highlights, harder highlights? How many people are involved in them? How quickly do they happen, right? That also contributes to difficulty. Sustained height, right? Holding a height. Is it single leg, double leg? Are the swimmers getting out really high? Are there spins at the end of a figure? Are there 8 people doing that part, right? Because it's always harder to synchronize 8 people. In my opinion, I would make sure that movements are executed at a higher level versus always trying to jam-pack your routines with difficulty. Because when you watch the routine, it needs to look good to get credit. Now, I get the difficulty coaches or judges might nail you for lower difficulty, but my opinion is that we need things to be executed at a high level and then bring in the difficulty. I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on that. Feel free to send me a message, get a conversation going on Facebook. But that's just my opinion, is that, yeah, we need things to look good and then add some more difficulty. That doesn't mean we don't challenge our swimmers. That's not what I'm saying. Let's just make sure that the routines are not too hard, so you're getting crazy high difficulty scores, but then your execution is really suffering and your swimmers aren't improving, okay? Remember, it's all about balance. So balancing that difficulty with the execution so your team is positioned to be very successful. I really love presentation. The thing that I love about it is that you do not need to be a talented synchronized swimmer, artistic swimmer to have great presentation. You need to have maybe some confidence, but you do not need to be the best swimmer in the pool to have the best presentation. 3 areas I'm looking for are the swimmers. Actually, how are they presenting? So with their face, with their body, what's the picture that I'm seeing from them? Secondly, are there interactions with the judges? Are they looking judges in the eye? Are they looking towards judges? Make sure your pool pattern is positioning your swimmers successfully so they can check out the judges and they can connect with the judges. And then the third point that I'm always looking for is the posture. So are the swimmers, do they have their chests open when they're in egg beater? Are their chins up? When they're in ballet legs on their back, is their body open? Are their eyes open? Are they still smiling? Remember, especially when swimmers are on their back, the judges have a great view of them. So everywhere they are, we need to make sure that they're presenting. And remember, some of the best presenters I've ever seen in the water were not the top athletically gifted swimmers in the pool, but presentation can sell yourself, because we all want to watch swimmers that can present, right, and that are performers out in the pool. For your highlights, do you have a variety of highlights? Could be partner moves, cool pattern changes. Remember, highlights aren't just big throws and lifts. Do you have platforms? Do you have 2 stacks? Do you have 1 stack? Is your stack a throw, a backflip, a spin? Is there balance in the types of highlights you're using? Where are your highlights positioned in the pool? Are they all right where you jump in? And that might be the case for you based on the limitations of the pool that you're in, so then go with that. But if you have a deep pool all the time, then your highlight should be positioned throughout the pool in good spots for all of the judges to take advantage of that. Are your highlights efficient? Or do they take like 30 seconds to set up for? Are they stuck in the middle of the pool? How effective are your highlights? If it takes you 20 seconds to set up for a highlight and the highlight is kind of meh, then that's not really effective, right? You might be better off changing that highlight. How risky is the highlight? Now again, this is more for the higher levels, right? Because this will help towards your difficulty scores. So thinking about, yeah, the 1 stack, depending maybe what the girl or guy is doing on top, that could be more risky, right? If they're doing a rotation and a flip, and I don't know, I don't really know the terminology for the cool stuff that they do on top, but that could be something, right? Wow factor. Sometimes you have an athlete on your team that can do stuff that you know nobody else can do, right? So I remember the one year that Russia had that tiny athlete and she could just fly, so they could throw her, right? Other teams have had someone really flexible so they can take advantage of that person's strengths. Okay, so when I'm looking at the routine, I'm just making sure that the highlights that are being done are effective and worth it, aren't taking up too much time, making sure that the judges can all see it, it's in a good spot in the pool. And ideally, if we can get, variety of highlights and not just being these big throws. I really enjoy a good pattern change, a really cool hybrid. You know, I remember different types of highlights, not just the big throws, right? For flexibility, what I am looking for is, again, it comes back to that balance, right? So your team might not be good at splits, but you should probably have some type of flexibility move in the routine just to balance off a routine, right? If you have a team that's awesome at verticals and spins, yeah, for sure take advantage of that. But you also want to show that there's other sides of the sport, and there you're going to be taking a bit of a risk because your swimmers aren't as good at it, but that's something that your routine needs to have. And flexibility doesn't just have to be splits. That's kind of the most obvious, I guess. But it could be different positions. Like a bent knee surface arch is a flexibility move. Could be the arm movements. It could be in a highlight, right? It could be in some partner moves. Maybe you have 4 swimmers that are really flexible, so you could take advantage of adding some more flexibility in that way, okay? Analyze the variety in the movements. How do you get into hybrids? How do you get out? How are you doing the propulsion to get in and out of different patterns? What's the timing? Are you doing everything at the same tempo? Do you have faster parts, slower parts? Even within a hybrid, is there tempo changes? How much variety is there in your patterns? Like we talked about at the beginning, go back to the beginning and go through the patterns part and see where you're lacking variety or maybe you're great. How about the choreography? Is your choreography very similar? Do the hybrids all have that same feel? Perhaps when you're doing pattern changes, the team is always doing a similar type of thing. So it could be that they're always doing kick, pull, kicks in all their pattern changes. Just making subtle little changes can increase the variety in your routine. It's great that you've done all this analyzation up to this point, but it doesn't matter if you don't prioritize what you need to do with that information. The 3 areas that I prioritize are choreography, technical priorities, and training priorities. So for choreography, you can only pick a few things. What, if you changed it, would have the greatest impact on your routine? What would help the execution scores go up, the difficulty go up? Anything. Think about what will make your routine better if you changed it. What are your technical priorities? What do you actually need to do training-wise of technique to get that routine better? Is it support skull drills? Is it maybe spin technique? What is it that you need to do to take your routine up? Then there are training priorities. Perhaps there's endurance problems. Maybe there's breath holding problems. Again, all of this information that you did from analyzing will help you set the priorities that you're going to follow through in your practices. Okay, this is the key part. I cannot say that enough. You need to prioritize what you are going to do in your training following analyzing your routine. Okay, if you're at the end of the season, well, maybe you'll have a little bit of a different focus, but it's really important that you know what needs to be done for your group of athletes. And maybe this part is a bit harder for you to pick out what would have the biggest impact. So in that case, I would find a mentor coach, a head coach, somebody that you trust their opinion. Go find some judges, and you could ask them, in your opinion, and walk them through what you're debating, changing or not changing, and see if they can also help you get clarity on what should be changed. So I just went to YouTube and I found an American routine from, I think they're from Stanford. So I just went through 2 laps of their routine, just giving you an idea how I work through analyzing a routine. Now, mind you, I don't ever just go through a routine once. I go through it multiple times because there are different layers to capture. But I'm just showing you how I verbalize going through a routine. The first thing I do when I watch a routine is I actually turn the music off, and then I watch it one time through or partly the way through so I can see if there's any trends that are starting off right from the beginning of the routine. And when I watch this one through, I already got the sense that when I watch this one, I'm going to be looking for 8-person parts together and parts that aren't highlights. There's a ton of highlights, whether it's real highlights, just partner things. Anyways, we'll take a look here and we'll start pointing out stuff. So this setup's a tad long. I'd make a note of that. And then it's just a boost, so it's kind of like, is that worth it? So this is still another highlight. This is kind of first real pattern for the team. Little mini figure. Again, we've got 4 and 4 going on. We've got another highlight. Quite a long time for the setup. But it's nice how that transition, lots of people came up quickly. Again, we don't have much 8 and 8 going on. A lot of highlight, highlight, highlight type movements. And it's hard to track patterns when routines look like this. Again, another long setup. Was it worth it because that was pretty cool highlight, pretty high? Now we've got 8. But then again, it changes right away. We've got a pattern change. Right, still don't have all 8 again. Had all 8 for a second, another pattern change. Another highlight. So you can see how lap 1 was really heavily choreographed with highlights. So now we've got some more patterns, but still there's lots of little highlights and not a lot of 8 on 8 movement. So when I would write out corrections for this routine, that's exactly what I'd be looking for. how many highlights there are per lap, how many patterns there are, and how many 8-person sections are there on the surface pattern change. So they had a figure that had lots of underwater pattern changes, or sorry, in a hybrid figure changes. Here was another in a hybrid pattern change. Now we have all 8, right? So just making sure that there's a balance in the routine. I like to take a lap by lap approach to watching routines. So I suggest checking the time that the lap starts, then writing out all the patterns. This usually takes a little bit of time. Then noting what types of pattern changes they are. So that would be the underwater, in a hybrid. After you got all that figured out, then check the time that the lap ends. Then start looking for other points to analyze. Once you've got all of that done for a lap, move on, and then at the end of all of it, look at it and see how it works for the overall routine and if there's anything that you notice from there. It's hard to see the picture from inside the frame. For our own routines, we get so caught up and we really take a lot of ownership on our routines. So it's hard for us to actually step back and look at the routines and sometimes find out what's missing or what's happening too much. And so what I'm here today to offer for you is an opportunity for me to actually help you out with your routine. Let me help you by analyzing your routine, doing those pattern analysis, giving you a few choreography suggestions, some technical priorities, and giving you those training priorities for you to help your routines get up to that next level. The investment for team routines that are under 3 minutes is $100, and if you're over 3 minutes, then it's $150. If this is something that you would like to pursue, then go to my website, theonlinesynchrocoach.com, and go to services, and then underneath there you'll see team routine analysis, and from there you'll be able to check out and pick the routine length of yours. Feel free to email me too if you want some more information, Vanessa@theonlinesynchrocoach.com. I can hear you saying, but I have no more competitions this season and this routine's being retired. Why would I need to analyze my routine? Well, what often happens is, as coaches, we get into a kind of like habits with our routines, right? So they all start to kind of look the same year after year. So if you're making errors, you're going to keep making those errors year and year after year. So that's why, even though you don't compete maybe that same routine, there's going to be those same flaws that will show up in the following season, right? That's why you need to go for judges' comments at the last competition of the year to make sure you're picking up on those things that you're doing year in year out, okay? This is easy. I'll do it myself. Absolutely, it is easy. The problem is as coaches, you have so many other things that you have to do, right? You have to take care of the lesson plans, the yearly training plans, the choreography, the parent meetings, the swimmer meetings. So there's a lot of stuff that's already on your plate, and you're right, you absolutely can do it. And I hope this webinar is giving you the tools that you can take and just do a fantastic job analyzing your own routines. This is just for those people that feel like, I just don't have the time. I know I can do it, but I need a little bit more time to my own planning, right? And so let's have someone else do this. I already know what I need to do. Well, you might, but it's always a good idea to have somebody else checking out what you're doing, because often a fresh set of eyes, somebody doesn't have any investment in your routine, somebody who hasn't ever seen your routine, like this would be the first time that I'd ever seen your routine, then I would be able to give you a very unbiased opinion of what I think needs to happen. It's never too late. If you haven't already done it, do some routine analyzation of your own routines. Go through this webinar again, take some notes, see what you should be checking for. Also, you could even look at your competitors. Who came ahead of you? What do you need to do to catch up to them? Who came right after you? What are you needing to do to make sure you maintain your placing above them, okay? So remember, you've still got time. And in fact, right now is a great time. You have all summer to look at your routine, strategize, so in the fall you can create a top-notch routine for the following season. Thank you so much for taking the time out today to watch this webinar. I hope you found a lot of great content in this so you can take your routines to the next level. If you're interested in having me come out to your organization and going through routine analyzation with your club or your province or your state, just let me know. Shoot me off an email at vanessa@theonlinesynchrocoach.com. You can go to my website. I have lots of free articles on there for you to get some more information about lots of different topics. And again, so much gratitude for you guys continuing to support me and all my online ventures. Take care.